Welcome to Future Recapped. Today, I am going to explain an American science fiction and comedy movie called Robot and Frank. The first scene features an elderly, forgetful man named Frank. Frank is divorced and lives alone. Madison, his daughter, travels abroad for a living, and Hunter, his son, visits him once a week. Frank goes to the library to get some books and meets Jennifer, a librarian who has known Frank for many years. While Jennifer is looking for the book, Frank receives a call from his son, whom he does not recognize at first. "Is that your son, Hunter?" Jennifer inquires. After Jennifer's question, Frank is able to recall his memory and respond to the phone call. Frank discusses the shop, which has been closed for many years, during the call. He then enters a store and shoplifts a toy, but the shopkeeper notices him and asks him not to return. In the next scene, we see Frank walking in the middle of the road. Hunter arrives soon to pick him up. He complains about the mess Frank has made as they drive back to the house. Frank keeps the toy in his safe. Hunter wants to take his father to the doctor, because he keeps forgetting things. But Frank refuses to go to the brain center, and acts fine. Hunter then introduces his father to the robot for assistance, but Frank appears dissatisfied with it. So, Hunter drives back, leaving the robot with Frank. After Hunter leaves, Frank tries, but fails to turn off the robot. The robot wakes Frank up the next morning, and suggests a grapefruit for Frank's breakfast, but Frank prefers cereal. The robot refuses it, claiming that cereal is unhygienic. The robot invites Frank to go gardening, but Frank declines. The robot tries to persuade Frank. He says that he is programmed to monitor and improve Frank's physical and mental health. But Frank ignores the robot completely. Time passes, and the robot helps Frank with his daily activities. One day, Frank walks to the library with Robot. He instructs the robot to remain outside. Frank discovers that the books are being removed in order to modernize the library. And as he walks out of the library, he notices some children interacting with the robot. So, Frank yells at the children. He instructs the robot, if that happens again, just say, "Self-destruct sequence initialized," and then start counting down from 10. Frank then returns to the same store and attempts to steal another toy, but the storekeeper approaches him and inquires, "What's in your pocket?" Frank quickly replaces the toy and displays his empty pockets. The robot then directs Frank to return home. Frank calls his daughter on the way back and complains about the robot. Frank also instructs her daughter to speak with Hunter and free him. Meanwhile, he notices the same toy in his bag and realizes that the robot assisted him in shoplifting. When Frank gets home, he asks the robot if it is programmed for any kind of stealing or robbery. It responds that it has only been programmed with the definitions of these terms. The following day, Frank teaches the robot to pick the lock. The robot tries it, and Frank sits back and waits for the robot to crack it. Frank reveals that he was arrested for possessing stolen goods and tax evasion during this process. He also claims to be a second-story man who specialized in jewelry. Frank then takes the robot to the library to evaluate its suitability for the robbery. He meets Jennifer there, and she asks if he owns the robot. Frank responds yes. Jennifer introduces herself to the robot and inquires about its name, but Frank's robot has no name. Jennifer suggests Frank name his robot, and then introduces her own robot, Darcy. Frank and Jennifer sit and talk about how new technology is taking over the world. Neither of them seems happy about it. Jennifer then mentions a small fundraiser party on Friday. She invites Frank to accompany her because the event is only for couples. Frank gladly agrees because he has always liked her. Later, Frank returns home and prepares the robot to steal the valuable book that Jennifer had shown him earlier. The robot initially refuses it, but Frank persuades that it is only for one night. Soon after, Frank receives a call from his son informing him of Madison's complaint. Strangely, Frank agrees to keep the robot. Frank then instructs the robot not to tell anyone anything. "Developing trust is part of my program," says the robot. Frank takes his robot to the library at night. He first covers the CCTV camera with black spray, not to leave any proof of him stealing. Both sneak into the library, steal the most valuable book from the shelf, and flee. But Frank forgets his glasses on the library table. Both of them return home, and Frank believes Jennifer will be overjoyed to see the book. At the Friday party, Jennifer mentions that someone broke into the library. Frank pretends to be unaware of the incident. Meanwhile, Jake Finn, the new owner of the library, approaches them with his wife, Ava. Jake then takes Jennifer with him to introduce her to the rest of the party guests. Meantime, Frank instructs the robot to hide the book somewhere else because he is concerned about being caught. While Jennifer is distracted by other people, Jake returns to Frank and asks if he wears glasses while reading. Frank categorically denies that he does not. Jake expresses his displeasure at seeing Frank at the party. After a while, Frank begins to doubt the entire party and informs Jennifer that Jake is not who he claims to be. Frank keeps an eye on the jewelry of the people. On another occasion, Frank considers the next burglary, but the robot restricts him from doing so. The robot agrees on one condition: there is no risk, which Frank appears to be fine with. Frank then prepares himself. He begins spying on Jake with his binoculars. Jennifer arrives at Frank's place for dinner that night, but Frank asks her to return. Jennifer, being upset, leaves the food outside his house and drives away. Frank opens the door to see Jennifer leave, and continue working on his plan. When the robot sees Frank's enthusiasm for his work, he tells him that planning a burglary is a great idea. Frank is also happy to be returning to these projects after a long absence. Out of joy, Frank instructs the robot to arm wrestle. The door suddenly knocks, and the robot opens it. Madison walks into the house. Frank is overjoyed to see his daughter. Madison tells Frank that she is staying with him. She then whispers something to the robot, and it turns off. Madison then shares a number of photos from her international trip, but Frank is only concerned about the robot. The next day, as Frank wakes up, he is still thinking about the robot. He attempts to wake it but fails because he does not know the password. After some time, Madison returns from the grocery store. Frank attempts to persuade her to activate the robot, but she refuses. Frank goes outside on his own to spy on his target. He becomes frustrated because he does not have an assistant. Following this, Frank returns home and begins destroying the kitchen. Madison stops him and asks what has happened. Frank responds, he is hungry and wants to eat lasagna. Madison agrees and prepares it, but Frank insults the food. Madison persuades Frank to appreciate it. Frank then asks how long she intends to stay with him. As long as you need me, Madison responds. Madison is irritated by his father's behavior. The next morning, as Frank awakens, he finds his daughter cleaning the kitchen. Frank is skeptical that she activated the robot, but she denies it. Frank yells at her, and she finally admits it. He then confronts his daughter and persuades her to activate the robot. Madison finally agrees, and the robot is active. Madison then walks away, saying that he shouldn't be so reliant on the robot. As soon as she walks away, Frank whispers to the robot that they'll carry out the robbery tonight. On the same night, Frank reveals his entire robbery plan to the robot. He informs them that the goal is to steal Ava's valuable jewelry. The robot then inquires how to gain access to the highly secured house. The security system is designed by security companies, not by thieves, Frank responds. He also says he can easily find the entry and exit points. In the middle of the night, Frank and the robot sneak into Jake's house. They proceed to the safe, where Frank instructs the robot to try every possible combination to open the safe. They succeed in stealing the jewelry, and then prepare to flee. However, Jake and Ava return, arguing with each other as they are trying to leave. Their arguments quickly turn into romance, and they begin to kiss. During this time, Frank and the robot leave. When Frank gets home, he examines the jewelry and is astounded to see such high-quality jewelry. Frank then keeps the jewelry in his safe, but he doesn't appear to be pleased. Frank and Madison are resting in their backyard the next day. A few moments later, Jake, with the cop Sheriff Rawlings, accuses Frank of stealing his belongings. Despite the fact that Frank is the primary suspect, Rawlings does not believe Frank is capable of such activities at his age. Jake requests that Frank be arrested, but Rawlings refuses. Before leaving, Jake yells at Frank, claiming he knows Frank was the one in the library and is to blame for everything. Rawlings then pulls Jake away and the two of them leave. The next day, Madison departs for her trip abroad, and Frank gives her the same diamond as a gift during their goodbyes. Frank notices a van outside on the way as soon as Madison leaves. Frank turns up the music and says to the robot, "We have to erase all the evidence." Frank then disposes of all of their paper plans and places the other diamond in a small plastic bag. While attempting to cut the jewelry in half, he accidentally cuts his own finger. Frank agrees to call his son after the robot advises him to do so. He instructs the robot to notify Hunter that he is dying. Hunter drives to his father, concerned, after receiving this message. Frank pretends to be sick as Hunter arrives. He expresses regret to his son, for not being a good father. Hunter then recalls his childhood memories with his father. Soon after, Frank hands Hunter a briefcase, and instructs him to hide it in a secure location without looking inside. Hunter is perplexed at first, but eventually agrees. As Hunter drives away, the van blocks his path. The police surround him and begin to investigate. When the cops open the bag, they discover the toys that Frank stole from the shop. Jake is dissatisfied and wants to search the entire house. Hunter is informed by Sheriff Rawlings that his father is a suspect in a multi-million-dollar robbery. He becomes irritated after discovering that his father is merely playing games and has lied about the death. Hunter then yells at the robot, but it remains silent. Jake becomes keen on the robot and considers downloading its memory. Jake then begins to smack the robot. The robot initiates a self-destruct sequence and begins counting down the seconds. Frank flees, causing everyone to distract from the robot. After a while, the cops realize it is lying. Frank then steals Hunter's car and flees, taking the robot with him. Frank apologizes to Jennifer as they drive to the library. Jennifer soon discovers that Frank stole the book. Frank then confesses, but his gaze is drawn to a photograph of Jennifer with her husband. Frank then realizes Jennifer is his wife and kisses her. Frank and the robot then return home on foot. When Frank is apprehended by the police, he locks the door from inside. The robot repeatedly suggests that Frank format its memory, but Frank refuses. Frank is finally persuaded by the robot, and he presses the format button as a result. After some time, Hunter pays a visit to his father, who is suffering from severe memory loss. Frank then reunites with his family, and they enjoy a meal together. As he walks away, Frank hands Hunter a small note that reads, "Check out the robot's garden under the tomatoes. Have a good time, kids, Dad." Subscribe to enjoy more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help out the channel. Thanks for watching. To continue the show, simply click on the movies on your screen and enjoy.